Well, friends, you have now entered the Talking Headspace. I am Charlie.
And I'm Corey.
And this week we will be discussing the Talking Heads 1980 album, Remain in Light. This is part of our Mondegreen month since Phish just did their festival. And this is an album that they've covered entirely. And in fact, one of the songs on it is a staple now and was even performed at the festival. So it's a perfect time for us to dive into David Byrne and his wild mind with his bandmates.
Wild Mind indeed. This is one of the more unique albums in my lifetime, I feel like. I won't say in their discography because there are quite a few unique albums in their discography, but it is definitely one that has stuck with me over time in all types of different ways, including Phish, because Cross-Eyed and Painless is my jammy piece, especially when it comes on live. In fact, their cover in 96 really put me onto this album as a whole. You know, I grew up with Once in a Lifetime. That song has spoke to me since I was a kid, but their cover definitely turned me on to this whole entire album.
Yeah, and I can definitely see why it was a natural choice for a jam band such as Phish, especially the first half of the album.
Yeah.
It's just made for that kind of treatment. And I did listen to their version of it, and I give them a lot of credit for even doing it live because Talking Heads had to have additional musicians to do this album live because they went deeper into some directions they'd previously explored. So the backstory of this album is that Talking Heads, that is a band that they've got a lot because they did not always get along. David Byrne is brilliant in many ways, but not the best person to be a band with and he will admit that. He's admitted that. This album was produced by Brian Eno, a super producer, very well known in his field. But Byrne and Eno were kind of on one side with the rest of Talking Heads on another. And the drummer, Chris France, and the bassist, Tina Weymouth, really were thinking of leaving because David Byrne was just so controlling. But they went to the Caribbean, relaxed a bit, and this was all while their bandmates were doing side projects. They ended up coming back together and decided to get back to work in 1980, continue their album a year rate they were going at, the Talking Heads. It had kind of been thought of as a vehicle for David Byrne primarily. It's like he writes the songs, but this time it was like, no, the band actually contributes, and they were going to contribute to the songwriting more so this time. They really did go get a lot of this music just from jam sessions, actually.
Yeah, it's so wild looking into this album to see the correlation. Like, of course, it's a great album musically for Phish to pick, but to really see the jam mentality of them just really building these songs off of recorded loop tracks of their jams. It really fit the mold there. And of course, I'm not going to put it past Phish thinking or knowing that, but it was new to me, and it was so cool to see how this album was really built up, almost all the pieces coming together the way I read it, seeming like they weren't going to come together, and we got an album like this from it.
Yeah, most definitely. And the band wanted to really, their idea behind this album was really to combine African music. They were specifically inspired by the music of Fela Kuti of Nigeria and combine that with their new wave and rock sound. And they'd begun this on Fear of Music, really, but they were going to go more in deep with it. And everybody was on board with that idea, despite the personality clashes amongst the band. But yes, so the recording for this album actually did begin in the Bahamas. And the band members were working apart through a lot of these sessions because just France and Weymouth had their own way, and Jerry Harrison was working more so with Byrne and Eno a bit. But of course, a lot of the album was also recorded in the US, and they made use of some of the best musicians and singers that America had to offer as well. One in particular being Nona Hendryx of the group LaBelle, which also featured Patti LaBelle. So she had some pipes on her to be adding to this album. And Yeah, the album was released. They did this all in less than a year. They put these songs together, which is pretty impressive. This was all recorded actually in just 2 months, July to
Yeah.
August of 1980. It was all done, all to be released in October. And it came out, and Talking Heads wasn't really a pop band at this point in time. Their real pop success, they made the top 40 one time, but their greater success would come in the coming years after this. But the critical acclaim for this was immediate, and they ended up still doing okay considerably. Like the album sold pretty well. It made it to number 19 on the Billboard 200. And it also made the top 40 in Australia, Canada, New Zealand, Norway, Sweden, and the UK. So not bad at all, especially for a more somewhat underground band such as Talking Heads. And it sold steadily. It was in the top 100 for the year end of 1981. And I mean, Talking Heads were really looking into what was going on around them and adopting it, not just with Afro beats, as we would call them today, but hip hop was emerging as well, and that found its way into the music.
Yeah, I think I'm so happy that you talked about the Nigerian sound and what they were doing there, because they weren't just emulating this sound, which I think is important. They were really trying to blend it, to really bring it in with, I'll say, like rock, pop, really a blend of everything. Seamlessly blending this sound was very important to them on this album. And to see the way that it was adopted by the world, or you know, bought album wise by the world and heralded, was really neat to see, looking back and reading on this album, because it's not necessarily iconic to the time. I'm sorry, it is iconic to the time, but it's not necessarily something that you saw in commonplace on the charts at this point for most of this album. So I think it's super important that you touched on that, and it's super important that they did that, because there's a lot of new, I'll say, modern and postmodern stuff that I think really has drawn from this a lot. I don't want to get too far ahead on that, but I'll talk about it as we go through. There, in my opinion, there's a lot of stuff that we enjoy to this day that is inspired by this album, or even this kind of sound.
Oh, most definitely. I mean, Afrobeats has especially been a popular genre these past few years, and has just gotten bigger and bigger in the United States. And it's funny you speak of influence, because a band that we've talked about a couple of times on here before, Radiohead, actually was really specifically inspired by this album when they did their Kid A album in 2000, which is not one of the ones that we did. But I really liked what Johnny Greenwood had to say about Remain in Light, because he assumed that it was composed of loops, but he actually learned from Jerry Harrison that no, Talking Heads recorded themselves playing all the parts repetitively. They just kept playing it. And Greenwood said, like, that's why it's not exhausting to listen to, because it's not the same music again and again. It's not just a loop, it's a bit different each time. And he even said, quote, there's a lesson there, unquote. And Radiohead chose to adopt that for when they went a bit more electronic with Kid A. And I do think that's an important piece of the album. It is a different technique that we hear, and it's not what often done. Loops are very common, but the fact that they played each part repetitively is really a show of this band's dedication in perfecting their art.
That is wild, because I was under the impression that it was all loops too, or for the most part. Now, listening to it, I could figure it as elongated loops, but it's really exciting to hear that this was played and recorded piece by piece live. Ooh, that 2 months and they did this. That's mind-blowing. The amount of production on this album alone is almost anxiety inducing to me, thinking about recording these parts and putting them together. So kudos to them. That's amazing.
Yeah, I mean, they may have been difficult personalities to deal with, but they did get results. And those results are critically acclaimed to this day. This is often considered the Talking Heads album, their very best, and it's ranked very high on many best album lists. This was like, especially for just the 80s, you'll typically see it in at the least the top 10 of the whole 80s decade. And in the most recent Rolling Stone list of the 500 greatest albums, this is all the way up at number 39. So
Wow.
very high for that list. And well, do we agree with that? Well, that is really to be determined. But
Yeah.
it is interesting, though. It's easily their most critically acclaimed, though not their most commercially successful. This is definitely an example of where the two do not go hand in hand. This was certified gold in the US, but the follow ups did even better. And there's a variety of factors into that. But yeah, this what was interesting about this is that Brian Eno actually did not work with Talking Heads again after this album. Because he did produce the previous two as well. I think Talking Heads did take a bit of a hiatus in between this and the next release, which was Speaking in Tongues, but that wasn't until 1983, and Talking Heads produced it themselves. But they were able to at that point, and that was an even bigger commercial success than this album. That one features Burning Down the House.
Oh
So,
yeah.
you know, they were able to do it themselves, but and obviously most of the band didn't really care to work with Eno because they just was he was a difficult personality, even if he did get great results.
A mix of clashing personalities, and most of the time it comes out gold. And this is one of them, I think. I know we're going to get into it, but it's so wild to hear all these different clashing personalities and mindsets, and then watch the musicianship come through at the very least.
Yeah, one example of that I really loved was David Byrne included a bibliography for this album to show
I
off the
saw that.
influences. And oh, his bandmates did not like that. Tina Weymouth Loud said she did not read any of those books, and she just was pissed that it was even a thing. And the most unfortunate thing about this all is at the time, even though the band wrote all of the songs, apparently following the advice of Brian Eno, David Byrne credited the songs to just himself and Eno, and oh, that pissed his bandmates off big time.
That's wild. That's wild.
Yeah, they've retroactively been added, but that was a big,
Oh, okay.
yeah, at the time they were
Wow.
not, and that was a big point of contention amongst the band, which understandably,
Of
because
course.
yeah, if they worked on the song, they should be credited for it. It's really a shame to know how many credits weren't given back in the pre-streaming days.
It is. We talk about it way too often. It's
Yeah.
mind blowing.
Yeah, we talked about it the last episode. We're talking about it again. It's just really sad,
The
but
the humanity is not necessarily on the highest level alongside of the musicality. It seems like in these cases.
no, but no, it's definitely not, especially when it comes to this band. I just want like a Talking Heads official documentary so badly.
I in all honesty, and I'm not even crap talking right now. I don't know if you'll see it or you will ever see one that's not like spearheaded by Byrne, and it's not even controlling in my opinion, but like even when you see them play live, you can feel the avant-garde artistry, and in my opinion you can see this very maniacal genius look in his eyes. It's a wild thing to see. It's off-putting sometimes, maybe just to me, but not in a super negative way, just in a really making me feel something that I don't all the time with their music and their live shows. They are a very, very unique act, and I love them for that. But his look tells it all, in my opinion. Everything that you read, everything that you hear leads me to believe that unfortunately we'll never really see an unfiltered look into the Talking Heads, so to speak.
Yeah, they actually shockingly reunited for restoration of Stop Making Sense last year, but they are not
Yeah, man.
reuniting. They turned down a lot of money to reunite,
Uh,
actually.
that would have been cool to see. That would have been cool
It
to
would
see.
have been, but it does seem that David Byrne has mellowed out over the years, which that's a good thing. He better, because, jeez.
Yeah, man. Yeah,
Oh,
man.
yeah. David Byrne, just another mercurial musical legend.
Agreed. Agreed.
That's what he is. Uh, but we're really here to talk about the music. So with that being said, let's get into it. All 8 songs on Remain in Light.
Get at it.
Curtindo um podcast, né? Sabe o que você também vai curtir? Saber que o melhor flip de todos os tempos chegou. O novo Samsung Galaxy Z Flip 6, com Flex Cam, que tem zoom automático e faz selfies de 50 megapixels, e com bateria estendida para nunca te deixar na mão. Vá a uma loja ou saiba mais em samsung.com.br. Samsung Galaxy Z Flip 6. Galaxy AI chegou.
So the album begins with Born Under Punches, parentheses, The Heat Goes On. The parenthetical title actually comes from a New York Post headline that Brian Eno read. And for the guitar solo on this song, David Byrne used a Lexicon Primetime digital delay unit, which really does create a unique sound along with the African polyrhythms that we hear. This is a fantastic album opener, and I have to say, France and Weymouth are definitely an epic rhythm section. We talked a bit about the Rolling Stones having one, the Talking Heads really have one, especially to be doing these sounds. You really have to be dedicated and good to do it, and they really did it. And I also love that this song references a song from their debut album called Don't Worry About the Government. Um, yeah, I think this is a very cool song. I have a bit more to say later. I'll add that in a bit.
Yeah, I'm with you on the coolness. It's amazing the way this song, in a trance-like state, in my opinion, brings you in as a listener. There's so many pieces that are overlapped and repeated that you can't help to not pull yourself away from this song at all. And in my opinion, I just keep falling deeper and deeper into it. At 5:49 for an opening track, I have to be honest and say the first time I listened to this album, I thought, are they going to be able to fill enough space with this constant overlapping and constant looping? And I think they show us perfectly in this first song of how they are going to do it, and how they're going to do it almost perfectly, in my opinion.
Yeah, they are going to do it, but this might be a controversial claim, maybe a hot tea take, but honestly, the groove of this song kind of reminds me of Chic, the disco band. And I know that's not going to be popular amongst
I
the
can I can see where you're at.
disco sucks people that would also listen to Talking Heads. That's definitely, I realize those are two very different scenes, but this is kind of disco. Well, specifically the band Chic, but that's a compliment to me because I think they're both great bands.
No, I can feel you there. I mean, when you look at Wikipedia for the description of this album as far as genres, it goes as far as to go new wave, post punk, world beat, dance rock, art pop, avant pop, Afrobeat, and psychedelic funk. So I feel like we're going to, as subconscious listeners, immediately pull from our listening history, and it fits. And that's something very unique to this sound too, is the fact that it almost feels like anything will fit on top of this. A lot of the things, a lot of the grooves that they get into throughout this album for me are really lending to not only interpretation but improvisation over top, or just along with. Even in the smallest of like whistling, for me, I feel myself jamming on these songs so much, and it speaks to what they are, real true jams.
Yeah, that they are. And I definitely agree with the dance rock distinction for this first side of the album. This is
Oh
all
yeah.
dance rock. And we're going to
Oh yeah.
keep the party going with track 2, Cross-Eyed and Painless. This is a meeting of African music and hip hop. David Byrne was specifically inspired by Curtis Blow's The Breaks on this track. And it really does keep the sound of the first song going, but it's got more of a story to it, I think, than the previous one. Not that the heat goes on isn't a story, but there's a bit more narratively happening here, which I like. And this was a promotional single, not an official single, which is kind of strange considering it's a pretty well-known song by Talking Heads, but it did get a music video that didn't feature the band. It featured some street dancers, and it was directed by Toni Basil shortly before her own brief pop career, where she gave us the #1 hit Mickey. Toni Basil's actually had a pretty wild career, and her pop stardom is a blip in it, trust me.
Heard that. You're breaking up a tad on that last one, just a heads up.
Yeah, I just saw my connection was unstable.
It seems like we didn't lose any audio the last time that happened, but just a heads.
Yeah, well, the last time I was able to just stop it because of the
Gotcha.
VPN, but I have that disabled right now, so I'm not sure what that was about. I mean, if it's messy, we'll just have to get rid of it.
We'll work around it. No worries. I just want to let you know. I didn't know if you were seeing it on your side.
I did see that. It was unstable. Okay. All right then. We'll be. Yeah, I think we're good to go now. Okay. All right, but yeah, this song, as proof of my disco theory, this actually did reach #20 on the Billboard dance charts in a medley with a couple of other songs on the album. So you could definitely dance to this one. That is for sure.
Oh, yeah. I mean, that wood block cowbell combination that goes on constantly throughout, for me, is a driving force to my whole entire body. You want to talk about dance rock, whether it's these guys or Fish playing it, because I've heard it plenty of times live with Fish. It's just that dance tune for me. It sits in this pocket that is undeniable when, for me at least, as far as dance music, period. And it's wild because before Fish, I don't find myself really sitting inside of an avant-garde house per se, musically, but this one has connected regardless, and I've always loved it for that. When I first heard Fish do this, it wasn't even, I hadn't even gone far enough to listen, or I don't even know. Back then we were trading tapes, and I don't think the live ones had come out yet. I had heard they had done this, but to hear Cross-Eyed and Painless live was one of those jolts of energy that you get every once in a while when they, or any musician plays a cover that you hold so dear and connect to. So this one is always the jam for me. As far as harmonies inside of this, I think it's one of their top vocally. I love the way this song rolls. You said it does. It starts to complete the sound of the first and moves to a funkier bit of it and a more narrative bit, but it really does keep this album in this same groove. Another correlation to Fish for me, at least on this first half of the album, is Trey used to say, or still says, but one of Trey's pillars of their songwriting and musicality live was the goal to never make it so it was not able to be danced to. And I feel that on the first, at least the first half of this album, you really don't have time to stop tapping your foot at the very least. For me, gyrating uncontrollably all around the house. It's definitely a dance side.
Yeah, the first side specifically is a dance side. And unfortunately, the first side is going to end with the next song, but it's a nice and long dance groove that we've got. The Great Curve. And this features the guitar work of Adrian Belew. And the African influence actually finds its way into the lyrics with this one, with the line, "The world moves on a woman's hips," that comes from the book African Art in Motion by Robert Farris Thompson. And I mean, that's definitely an academic reference. And those kind of references can definitely be alienating to a listener. And I kind of dislike that a lot of the time. I think it's kind of pretentious, but well, David Byrne is pretentious, but that's part of why people like him. And I don't think it hurts this song at all, actually. It adds to the more avant-garde nature of it, but the music is still pretty accessible, I think. And like this, yeah, I'll say it. I can totally imagine this being played at Studio 54 because it's that extended 6-minute plus song, like a lot of the club classics of the day. They were played in extended forms. Even if it was a song you heard on the radio, it would be doubled in length for the single release or for DJs. And this is just in the album version, but they really did that here, and I appreciate it a lot. So I'm a big fan of this song.
Yeah, me too. This is the funky get down of really the album for me. I'll do a spoiler alert there, but this song, man, 6 minutes and 28 seconds of just fun get down. It opens and never stops with this Congo bongo, just hand percussion beat that doesn't stop, and it is lifted up. So this wild sound and this very low tone as far as the vocals go get lifted up by these beautiful funky, just, oh my god, perfect horns throughout this. And then the chorus starts to mimic these horns and we get this back and forth symbiotic jam here. I can't say enough great things about this. We talk all the time about filling time and filling the track. This one, not for a second do I have even the tiniest little bit to step away from. This is in your face and it takes you on a wild trip throughout. This is a really, really great song and a fitting ending to this 3-track side.
Yes, an unfortunate ending because I've been having a great time with it, but there is another side. And spoiler alert, it's not going to be quite as danceable, but it's still going to be there. Side 2 begins with "Once in a Lifetime." This was inspired by sermons, which that's pretty obvious. And the Velvet Underground was another influence on this song, actually. David Byrne said it was the jam of this was the band trying to play funk and failing, but they ended up creating "Once in a Lifetime" with that. And Brian Eno actually wanted to abandon this song at one point during the recording sessions, but Byrne insisted on working through it and keeping it. And well, that alone can tell you why Eno didn't work with Talking Heads after this album. He told them to ditch one of their signature tunes early on. Yeah, they're not all producers are not always right. But this was the single of the album, and at the time it made it to 103 on the Billboard charts, but not really an accurate reflection of its popularity. This was an early video for MTV, and it saw David Byrne dancing in front of religious art. This song was this video was choreographed by Tony Basil, one of the most accomplished choreographers ever. Her most well-known MTV work was probably for her own song when she did her cheerleader dances, and she was a beast doing it. But that was her, which is pretty wild to think about. But yeah, this was the single. It managed to make the top 40 in Australia, Canada, the Netherlands, Ireland, and the UK. And this one's lasted. This is one of those songs that's always kind of existed. You just hear it out where you go. And it's a highly critically acclaimed song. NPR called this one of the 100 most important pieces of American music of the 20th century, number 28 on the 500 greatest songs of all time list from Rolling Stone. Hot tea take. I do like this song. I do think there's nothing quite like it. It does have a good message. I do think it's overrated, though. I don't think it's quite at that level of greatness, just for me. And I actually prefer the live version of it and stop making sense to this album version.
I can feel you on the live version. I can't imagine this song being on the cutting room floor. And I can't even dare to imagine me existing without this song. When you say this song feels like it's always been, I have to say I've always felt this way. I remember, I'm talking early, maybe like 5 or 6, hearing this song and immediately attaching to it. I don't know whether it was that it sits on top of this dreamlike melody background track here. I don't know if it is the spoken wordness and shortened ideas that maybe as a young child I was drawn to of imagination, but this song is for me, it's transcendent, man. It really is. It is one of those ones that I can't imagine the world being without. It's produced to perfection. I can feel you on the live version of it, but it sings so beautiful. It's very close to a perfect song with me. I'd have to be very close to all of the rankings that you said. I don't see an overratedness here, but then again, there's a lot of my heart into this song throughout the years. Yeah. Definitely a classic. Oh man, I feel like I'm rambling on these, but they're beautiful songs. Now, starting off the second side of an album, I think it's a perfect placement for this, because without going into spoilers, I couldn't see the rest of this album starting off here. If Once in a Lifetime finished the first side and we go into the next track, maybe the next track, but not anything after that being a draw to the listener, a flip song, as we say here on the podcast. So I'm glad it's where it was on the album. This is the start. For me, this is the start of the end of the first original Dance Thought, and we start to get into a more jammed and darker space throughout the album after Once in a Lifetime.
Yes, that we definitely do. I am glad this isn't with the first half side, because it is quite different from those. It does stick out on its own quite a bit from anything else on the album, really. Yeah, it still works on the album, of course, but there's nothing else quite like it here. Whereas the first side, those songs all really match well together. They mesh very well. But yeah, we're going to get a bit darker with the second half in terms of the track listing here, because there's 8 songs on this album. So track number 5 is Houses in Motion, which features prominent brass playing by John Hassell. This was a single in the UK with an alternate mix, made number 50 on the charts there and number 26 in Ireland. This song is a grower for me. It really doesn't stick out as much as the previous 4 songs. Admittedly, the first four songs are a tough act to follow if you're just listening to this front to back and not even flipping it over. Because I don't own this album, I listened to it straight on streaming. It just doesn't stick out quite as much. I don't dislike it at all, but it doesn't jump out in the way that the previous songs did. And because of that, I'm a bit let down, even though it's still a fine song.
It is. It's a grower for me too. More so in the fact of I enjoy it and its musicality. I really find the growing in it in finding the love of it being the bridge for me here, because you still get the fleeting funkiness of the first half of this album so far. And on the other side of this funkiness, you start to get this really avant-garde, outside of the box jamming. So as a grower for me, I've found a love for it being that bridge. I have to say, this is one, if outside of Cross-Eyed and Painless, on the Fish live cover of this is my favorite song that they did. I really loved what they did here. It was a jam for me. I love the bass track on this. So that speaks to that version as well. But I enjoyed this. I think if I'm talking pacing again as a bridge, it's perfectly where it needed to be. With I have to be in agreement with you on it's not a standout song. But I think it does its job here, as we say.
Yeah, I did listen to the Fish version of this when they did it all the way through Halloween of 1996, and I did note that this song I felt was the one they were most able to make their own of every song
Sure.
on the album, which I did appreciate, like by turning it into more of a jam piece, because here it really isn't a jam piece. I think
Agreed.
the jam pieces, for the most part, are not present on the second side of the album. It's much more the first side, and yeah. But I was glad they kind of kept Once in a Lifetime faithful to what it was, but here they experimented a bit, made it their own, and I really respected that. Um,
Yeah, man.
but we're going to keep it going with the shortest song on the album, which is Seen and Not Seen, which I think is the most atmospheric song on the album. I also think David Byrne's vocal delivery on this song might be a precursor to mumble rap as we know it today, because he's mumbling. Yeah, there's some cool sounds in this song, but overall, I just do not vibe with this song. This is definitely my least favorite here. It's a skip for me, total filler. Not sorry if you think this album's a perfect 10, but this one's not it for me.
Yeah, I'm with you here. Where I heralded Houses in Motion for being this bridge, Seen and Not Seen for me seems to be almost like some cutting room stuff coming out of Houses in Motion. And it fails to be a bridge in sound and in thought process, musicality or music wise for me here. It starts off and I'm still feeling Houses in Motion, so I'm with it, and then it loses me maybe about 45 seconds to 50 seconds in. The really beautiful sound that I loved from Houses in Motion just wasn't matched here, and the pacing really falls. It really falls flat, and I try to be positive here, but I can't. As far as, unfortunately, this is the real only track that takes me all the way out, and I disassociate as a listener because I'm bored, and that I feel that's unfortunate. I hate saying it, but that's why we do this. We search it all the way through. Real quick, I forgot to say it, but if you like Houses in Motion, there's a really great song on Demon Days by Gorillaz, called "The Fire Comes Out of the Monkey's Mouth." Fire comes out of the monkey's head. I'm sorry. But it's really reminiscent of Houses in Motion and the start of Seen and Not Seen, to the point it's narrated by Dennis Hopper, and it's a really wild spoken piece. Just a little side listen there. but yeah, a fail here as far as going on with the album, in my opinion.
Yeah. Maybe a side listen we'll dive into more one day on this show.
There you go. There you go.
Very, very well may do that. But we are still in the talking head space, as I like to refer to it. And the penultimate track on the album is Listening Wind, which is very specifically inspired by Arabic music. A lot more delayed guitar on this song for sure. Not a dance tune by any means, even with more of the African influences. The most that we've heard on this side of the album so far, I believe. But I think it does what it needs to do. It's a very reflective song. At times, I feel like it's a bit more of a soundscape than a song, but it's a good soundscape. I'm not mad to hear it. My big issue here is with the pacing, because this comes after two slower, more reflective songs. And that much in a row is really kind of taking me out of it a bit. It's kind of like, okay, we're really losing momentum and we need to pick it up a bit. As much as I love that the dance songs are all together, and I sometimes wish there was something in to break up the monotony. I hate to say that, but really, I just wish there was a bit more of a kick in this second half of the album. Because it's just the pacing on its own. It's a cool song, but pacing's a problem.
Yeah, it's cool. I'm with you. It's a cool song, but at this point, I'm wondering why we're choosing to lose the momentum here. And in fact, listening to this album over and over again critically and reading and knowing what they were doing and how happy I was with it almost up until now, as far as bridging, I'm using bridging a lot here, but as far as incorporating this Nigerian sound and making it this fusion with pop and rock and different sounds, I just feel like here we're mimicking a sound rather than integrating it. And yes, you have made a beautiful soundscape. I like that example or that way to describe this song, but you're losing me as a listener on this album. It's tough. It's tough to say that on an album that's heralded so high and that I do have praise for in many different ways, but you're losing me. It's a short album too, so to phrase it this way, I don't necessarily understand it. It's frustrating, actually.
Yeah, and the burden of knowledge, knowing it's ranked so highly, can really work against an album, I think. Because it's just, you feel like you have to go with the grain and you feel like, am I just not getting it? Even if you do think it's an actual issue. But we have to remember at the end of the day that this is all subjective. What works for one listener is not going to work for another. And True. That's just how it goes. You know, like some albums that are highly rated, I completely agree with the rankings, but there's others I'm like, I just don't get it. We dived into that on this show before. Like on one end, I have Purple Rain. On the other end, I have OK Computer.
I knew you were gonna say OK Computer. Heard that. That's why we do it.
Yeah.
You know, such is art. Fully subjective. That's why we love talking about it.
Yes. But now we are at the end of the album with track number 8, The Overload. A lot of tribal influences on this song. Very, very distinct tribal sounds, which I like. I really appreciate. It creates a haunting sound. Even though I've kind of been lost a bit with this album, you can't not have this perk you up because it has that vibe to it. You're like, ooh, what's going on? This song's it's a good album closer, even though it's kind of a dreary song, but I mean that in a good way. Like it's very dystopian 1984, like in a song to me. So that I like. And I also like how on this album, the lyrics have gotten progressively darker as it's gone on, because this is definitely the most this is definitely the darkest song lyrically and musically on the album. I mean, I think it's a great album closer. I will say, because of its like foreboding nature, well, because of its foreboding, because of its foreboding nature, it's not a song I have a ton of desire to go back and listen to again. Just because it's too dystopian for me, I guess. I don't know.
I chuckled when you said tribal, trying to find some silver lining here. For me, it just don't cut it, man. It's a wild, crazy soundscape. For me, reminiscent to like some heavy Floyd. It's out there. It is out there. As a closer, it doesn't do anything for me as to give me closure, on an album. It is a pure, in the loosest way ever, jam vessel of sounds, and definitely not at the end of this album for me. I try to think, if you flipped the sequence of songs on this side of the album around, but I don't feel like Once in a Lifetime is a closer out, as far as this album would go. So it's very tough for me. I can at the very least see the dark progression outside of Once in a Lifetime, starting in Houses in Motion all the way to the Overload. But Overload is a tough closer for me on this. Not my favorite way to close the album. And I've been dreading doing these last three songs this whole time, because it feels weird. It just feels strange having a negative vibe on this. But critically, it's subjective, and I'm letting it out, man. I do not dig the Overload here.
Yeah.
Even if you look at the Fish
It
concert,
just dragged.
and then so what they had to do is open the next set with a super like crazy up tempo Brother, which is like a wild out there, full on crazy, and then go into 2001. Because if you would have opened that third set with 2001, you would have been stuck in this Overload dirge. Oh man, it's tough. It's tough.
I mean, I do see where you're coming from with it's a dirge, because it's so it's not necessarily what I'd call pleasant to listen to, but I don't think it's supposed to be either.
Yeah, and I can see it there. Yeah, I don't know. I'm trying to be nice about it.
Oh, quite a few hot tea takes when it comes to this second side of the album, that's for sure, because often this is rated perfect 10. But it doesn't sound like we're going to do that based on the second side. So there we have it. Remain in Light, often considered the magnum opus of the Talking Heads. I'm glad that we did this album. We hadn't done a new wave band in quite some time, not really since we first started doing this show, actually. So I'm glad that we got to return to that space, and with a really unique band. I'm glad we got a chance to do this album. With that being said, Corey, what's your grade for it?
Talking Heads, Remain in Light. What a wild, beautiful punch to start this album off. Some really iconic songs throughout. Pacing at the very best, a 7 out of 10. Unfortunately, we come into this second side and it really dips off for the last three tracks for me. Musically, this album is tight. Production, this album is tight. It's what you expect from Byrne. It's what you expect from the Talking Heads. And it is the next evolution at this point of their sound. And it does its job there. It really does, in a spectacular way. But the way we grade albums, and we put all these pieces together, I can't bring myself, as crazy as this sounds, to give it a B plus. I'm giving it a B as far as full album goes. It's a great album. But as far as all of our parameters, it falls into a B for me.
Yeah, I gotta go with a B as well, because the first side, love it, love it. Can't get enough of it. Yeah. Second side comes, it just lost me. And I listened to this multiple times, as I do, and it just never really picked up for me, even if I found more stuff about the songs to appreciate. And it is a shame because I do really like new wave music. I like the 80s in general for music. And I think this band is classic songs. I really was hoping this would be an A album for me, but unfortunately, it just wasn't it. I'm sorry to say that. But the good here is definitely worthwhile. So with that, favorite song on the album.
Oof, it's tough because I got a lot of love for a lot of stuff on here. I'm gonna go outside of what I thought I was gonna say, and I have so much fun with the Great Curve. I'm putting Great Curve up here. I'm gonna put that out there. Everybody jam on the Great Curve.
That's my favorite on the album too, actually.
Oh, nice.
Yeah,
Nice.
that one. Yeah, really, I really do love that song. They don't waste a second of space in it. It is, yeah, a wonderful, wonderful song. Definitely go jam on it. That's if you haven't, you're missing out. That's for sure. But speaking of jamming, Corey, what are we doing next week?
Speaking of jamming, we're finishing off the Monty Green month and going with our first ever Fish album. We're going to do the 5th studio album by Fish, and that is Hoist. The first Fish album that I ever heard. And I'll leave all the anecdotal stuff for next week, but one that's near and dear to my heart. So I'm so excited because if you guys don't know, you'll know now as I'm a huge fan of Fish, and I get to do it with you, Charlie. So this is one I've been waiting for. And we had to wait over 100 episodes to get to Fish, but we made it.
I know there was just a lot of stuff to cover in the meantime. There was a lot to do, but we are doing Fish, and you like Fish as much as I like Cher. So
this is true. This is true.
This is true. So it's going to be a great time, and we're really looking forward to it. Yeah, be sure to stay tuned with us. Follow us on social media. Links are in our description. And subscribe and rate us wherever you're listening to us. It would be much appreciated. We're so happy to be going strong over 100 episodes later now. So until then, you don't have to do any hoisting to listen to the next one.
Peace.